found me. How are you doing today? This is Ominously Positive, the place where you and I talk about dark subjects with an upbeat tone. I am your host, Mary Weather. Most people just call me MW. I am an autistic, and I have a few other comorbid conditions. I just tell people that, so I don't get bullied, or I get bullied less. And I also tell people that, so people who are like me don't feel so alone, or perhaps I can inspire a fellow autistic, or somebody similar, to follow things that are important to them, to you, important to you. There's a few other reasons, but those are off the top of my list today, and that is what I'm going to roll with. So, I like to try to help people, so one of my passions is true crime, because I have also had some very dangerous encounters to which I have survived, and thus it has really just spurned the fuel to the flames of the fuel, whatever. You know how that goes. I've always been interested in true crime. It started when I was very young with Sherlock, but then I had a few experiences and it just really added fuel to that fire. So here we are today. Today we are going to be tackling a very important case. Unlike my previous work, this one is an active case and requires extra respect. Especially, and you're going to agree with me, especially after I tell you some of the very lurid and disrespectful sensationalism that has happened with this case. This one is called the Down the Hill Murders, or the Snapchat Murders, or the Voice of the Devil, or just Abbey and Libby Murders from Delphi, Indiana. It's about two very amazing, wholesome girls taken way before their prime. The girls were able to film their perpetrator and record his voice, but yet the case remains unsolved. Also, unlike my other cases, even though I've done a very deep dive and I have a lot of details, I plan on actually cutting out a lot of this. I've actually recorded this podcast probably 3 or 4 times now, and it just really hasn't felt right. Mostly because I think all these details aren't actually going to be helping us solve this case. If you're interested in the deep dive that I have done, that goes above and beyond what we're going to talk about here today, please feel free to check out my written write-up. It's full of grammar mistakes, it's a very terrible read, but I did gather a lot of data there. I did eventually just cut myself off from research on this case, because just like my St. Louis Doe write-up, while I feel like there's a lot of information that could just be gleaned out there, I have now reached the wall where it's mostly just a rehash of things that have already been talked about, or very minute details that really aren't going to be helping us solve anything. Since this is an active case, I think that making this story shareable is way more important for once than the super nitty-gritty details like we usually do here. This case, quite frankly, is probably going to be solved when someone who knows who the killer is steps forward and names them. So if we really want to solve this case, sharing the story, spreading the suspect flyers, spreading his voice, spreading his photographs, is really going to hammer this case home. We need to put pressure on the media to keep this story up front and center. Honoring the girl's memory and supporting the girl's family is also very important. We can just talk about this case and move on, but I guarantee for the family, this case is in their thoughts every single day. And so we should support them, not by pestering them, but simply helping them get closure for this case by sharing the dang flyers. I don't know how many times I'm going to say it this time in the podcast, but sharing those flyers is going to be extremely important. Put it on your social medias, put it everywhere, just because it's important. Do it a few times a year. If you really want to be dedicated, do it a few times a month. You never know. It could really help. Besides the loss of their 2 girls, this family really has endured a lot of careless action and deplorable comments from people. From the very... Oh, my cats are fighting. Actually, they're not my cats, but they're fighting. Enjoy the sound of cat fights in the background, guys. From the very start of this case, rumors really just took off like wildfire. Suspect accusations were rampant. Fan fictions, can you even call it that? Really? Isn't that disgusting about this case? Homemade sketches, people went and altered the photographs. There was really weird and just very inappropriate comments, pestering the family, false news, false clues. Dark tourism has taken place over this case. I'm actually very disgusted. I'm just covering the very small iceberg of the inappropriate things that have happened with this case with the public. Now, there's good too. There are good people and good support that's happened, but this is just wild. I honestly haven't seen anything like this before. So I'm going to cover the good old suspects are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Sharing side-by-sides of possible suspects is highly discouraged. The police have come out and said this a lot. Naming random people that kind of look like the guy. It actually hinders the investigation, and also you could end up in a court of law yourself for defamation if you just name innocent people. So keep that in mind. Everything we talk about here today is obviously alleged. Please do not be sending any weirdness to anybody. I don't condone that at all, okay? And I'm going to highly discourage coming up with theories and things like that because we've already been through it all. So, like I said, this is the very odd case where I'm going to say, let's not try to sit here and solve it. Instead, let's just share the flyers. So, some of the things I kind of want to mention, just to really help you guys understand how terrible this is, but Abbey's mother works at a resort now outside of Delphi, and people go to this resort and they will actually question her about this case, and they don't even realize that she's Abbey's mom. And I've sat through Kelsey German's interviews. She's Libby's sister, and I have been really horrified about the amount of inappropriate questions and interest she receives, like creepy people saying things like, "Do you live alone? Are you scared?" That kind of thing. Very inappropriate. I'd like to just say, nobody has the right to get info from these people. You don't have the right to that. They'll say what they want to say. So, don't badger them, don't pester them for personal details, don't bother them with, "How are you feeling?" Because when you've been through a tragedy, people asking you that is a burden. Trust me. It is the worst thing. Especially years and years later. It's just because when somebody says it's not comforting. It's just putting salt into a wound or reopening the wound. So I know you mean well, but I promise. How are you feeling? How you doing? It hurts. Don't do that. Like I said, the best way to support is to share those flyers. And if you want to do monetary value stuff, donate to the Delphi fund. There's a reward out. Donate to that, or donate to the family's ballpark that they're putting up in the honor of the girls. Something along those lines to actually help, okay? Sorry if I'm coming off a bit patronizing. I just have done so much digging in this case that I'm just grossed out by the overstepping of the bounds. So I hope that's okay for me to be a little aggressive in that way. I hope that doesn't put you off. I imagine most of the people listening to my podcast are probably on my side or my view of things. So I don't think it's going to really hurt your feelings or anything like that. I bet you're probably agreeing with me. But yeah, that will be the conclusion. Let's go ahead and just start jumping into the case real quick though, okay? let me introduce the girls to you guys. So this story is about Abbey and Libby, who were 13 years old and 14 years old at the time. The girls were best friends with a very deep connection. Both of the girls had a lot of similarities, but they were also very comfortable with themselves to just be who they were. Like, Libby was really outgoing and a little bit louder than Abbey. But Abbey would go hop onto ATVs and just go on adventures. Their favorite colors were teal and purple. Sometimes this is reported as teal and blue, so I'm not really sure which of this is true. Teal and blue or teal and purple. Often you will see these two intertwining colors on ribbons around the town of Delphi to represent these two girls. They both enjoyed music. They both were in middle school band, they painted, they did photography, and they both were currently training to play softball. Libby, her full name was Liberty Rose Lynn German, and she was born December 27th, 2002 in Lafayette, Indiana, to Derek and Carrie Timmons and then Derek German. So, everyone called her Libby, obviously. She had 4 siblings, Kelsey and Glenna, who I think lived in Indiana, but Alexis and Hayden, I think those two lived in Kentucky. Libby was 5'4", with a slightly stocky build, and blonde shoulder-length hair. She was Caucasian and had blue eyes. She lived with her paternal grandparents, Mike and Becky Patty, and she'd lived with them since she was about 3 years old. But she often kept up a very good relationship with her mother, who lived in Kentucky. Derek was her father. He is a man described as very gentle, quiet, and he lived with them as well, just kind of off and on though. He does have a past, which is set aside and does not have an effect on this case. It's something of an issue for the family because they're afraid people are going to judge their daughter based on the past of the father, and it's just not fair. Libby was a very wholesome girl, and I don't think it's fair to judge the two. So, like I said, that life had been set aside. So I want to talk some more about Libby. Libby was, from what I can gather, very multifaceted, very sociable, and she had very big dreams to match all of that. According to her grandparents, Libby would journal her life and outline every single detail, and she had a timeline for college, where she was going to go to college, to when she was going to get married, and how many kids she was going to have. Most of her dreams seemed to involve doing anything that was going to help other people. Finding cures, solving crimes, police officer, or even a science teacher are some of the things that I had heard about her. Libby would have impacted whatever field because she was just so intelligent. She did so well in school. She even took extra classes at Purdue University and even prepping for the academic bowl in a high ability class during middle school. Everyone describes Libby as always trying to help others, even in small ways. She left delightful messages for her family on Post-its. Libby's mother, Carrie, also, she has this amazing tattoo sleeve dedicated to her daughter, and it's just full of symbolism. And I think my favorite is a message on a Post-it note from Libby on her arm. It's just amazing. Libby would daily post on her grandmother's Facebook, and she would just post these lovely messages. She would shower her family with baked goods, and she was just kind of a girl that would tackle all sorts of hobbies. She was like welding, volleyball, soccer, softball, alto saxophone, and even swimming. Each thing she would try, she just seemed to really excel at. swimming a 500-meter race in 8th grade, and she was just making constant swimming improvements. So to me, Libby, she just leaves behind this beautiful legacy of love and inspiration. And if you'll allow me a small personal note here, Libby, I just adore your Post-it notes so much. I plan on adopting them and leaving them for my own family. Small messages of love. I really adore this idea. And I want to also leave behind a legacy as rich as the love that I can see that you had for your family. I believe that the love you had for your family resonates to this day. I bet they can just feel it now. So, oh, see, I told you Gunter would do this. He just made a huge crash in the kitchen, and now I want to lose my marbles. Hey, Gunter! Lay down, baby. You're making me lose my marbles. Please. Anyway, this podcast might be full of all sorts of interruptions like that, but I am going to persevere. I must, because I just cannot redo this podcast anymore. I've done it enough, and I really want it to be genuine, and, well, this is how it is. I'm in the middle of renovating my house. My pets are crazy, and I don't have any other time to record except for when my kids go to bed, and they're actually quiet tonight, so I've just got to go for it, you know? Now Gunter's over here making sad eyes at me like he's really, depressed that I would do this to him. So now I would really like to talk to you about Abigail. Her name is Abigail Joyce Williams, and everybody called her Abbey. She was born June 23rd, 2003, and I'm going to butcher this name, Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, to Anna Williams and an unknown father. Anna was only 19 when she had Abbey, and the two grew up together. I can relate to this a lot. My mother had me very young as well. She was only 18, and we also grew up together. Abbey was an only child and lived with her mother and her grandmother in Delphi. So Abbey had relationships with her extended family. She is described as 5'4", with a small build, about 100 pounds, medium blonde hair, and hazel eyes. She is Caucasian. Some other maternal family members that you might would like to know are her grandparents Diane and Eric Erskine of Delphi. I've mentioned them a few times because they are just involved with her life enough that I probably should mention them so you're not like, who are they, when we're talking about her story. Abbey was described as a gentle girl with dreams of wanting to help people, just like her friend, and care for people and animals. Abbey wasn't exactly as sure of herself as what she wanted to do with her life, but she had all the potential and the support there from her family to explore, and she just seemed like she was a very good person. Some of her interests were possibly forcenics and police work. Abbey's family said she cared for and loved small animals, and she had a stray cat named Bongo her mother was allergic to. Abbey just had a really fun sense of humor, and she was describing, I checked out her Facebook, and she described her own job as a taste tester at Pizza Hut. Every day, people said that she dawned the day with a smile, and she just lit up the hearts of people around her with acts of kindness. Abbey liked to do arts and crafts. She knitted hats for newborns, she made hats, and she enjoyed sports too, like volleyball and softball. Abbey liked to camp, swim, ride ATVs, fish, and hike, and generally just seemed like she wanted to be outside all the time. She was an avid reader, and one of her prized possessions had been a Kindle reader, and it contained a large reading count. If you will allow me a personal note as well, Abbey, you have inspired me to enjoy my life more. Take a little bit of pride in my love to my family. You leave behind a very void of potential because we all know this world would have just been better with somebody as gentle and as kind and as loving as you were. And that is the girls. The other family I will just kind of introduce as we talk about the story. I'd like to tell you the short version of this really fast, and then we can get into some slightly more details if you would like. It is February 13th of 2017, a Monday, unseasonably warm. It's about 40 degrees with a low of 20. Abbey and Libby, two teenagers who are off from school this day, are just using it as a fun day to enjoy. They had just had a sleepover that night, and now they have convinced their family to let them go hiking in a normal spot so that they can take nature photographs, because that's what they just wanted to do that day. The trails are east of their hometown in Delphi, Indiana, and it's a very small, tight-knit town. It's the kind of place where people just leave their doors unlocked. About 1:45 p.m. they start to go hiking, and they're just enjoying nature and talking to each other about things. Libby posts a very beautiful photo of Abbey to Snapchat. I can tell that she was definitely a photographer or a budding photographer just by some of just by the angle and the lighting and everything. She really did a good job on this photo. It's a very haunting photo now, unfortunately, because that is about 2:07 p.m. and it marks the last moments that we see the girls alive officially. After this, the girls have vanished, and neither girl arrives at the pickup place where they're supposed to be at. The family decides something is wrong. The police, the town, and other officials begin searching for them that night, but nobody is suspecting foul play, and even though a large force of people showed up to help, most people are just assuming they got hurt hiking, they walked home and got lost, or something along those lines. The official police search force stops about midnight, but a lot of volunteers stay, and they choose to look for them through the night. The next morning, the search begins again in full force, but only to halt again roughly about noon, with despairing news that the girls had been found, but not alive. The girls' cause of death has never been released publicly, but the police have stated that they were murdered. The police hail the girls as heroes because they had recorded their attacker with their phone and shown great bravery and presence of mind. The police release some footage from Liberty's phone showing the perpetrator and his voice, making this case like none other. And that is the short version of this story. So if you'd like to get into a few more details, let's go ahead and do it. The crime scene place has never been officially defined by the law enforcement. However, they were estimated to have been found 0.5 miles from the bridge and across the Deer Creek, about 50 feet from the shore. It's assumed they went off the trail, down the hill, and to the north, then over a private driveway, and further north to the Deer Creek, which at the time would have been shallow enough like ankle deep or knee deep to cross. It's on the other side of that stream, up the stream, is where the girls are found, in a grouping of trees with some very deep grass. I hope I explained that correctly. I think if you look at a map, it'll make way more sense. Just trying to tell you verbally where they were at is a little difficult. I can see it clearly in my mind's eye, but trying to describe it is a little difficult. So I highly encourage you to just look up a map. Again, looking up photos and things like this on the case is fairly safe, so you should be good to go there. This spot is also due south of the cemetery on County Road 300 North, so that should help you also pinpoint it on a map. It's described as very private and quiet. It's close to the water, and again, it's against the flow of the creek. The property owner, Ron Logan, who was cleared of any involvement, by the way, mentions it's only possible to get to this place between the cemetery and the creek by foot because the terrain is very rough and steep. The place is about a half-mile east of the Freedom Bridge as well, so I hope that also helps you when you're looking at maps. So this place is the Delphi Historic Trails, and it's located in Carroll County. It contains the Monson High Bridge Trail that goes over the Deer Creek. But I think the locals just call it the High Bridge. The trail that they were on was the longest part of the system, and it's about 1.5 miles. I don't think the bridge was considered to be officially a part of the trail system because it's very run down, and I believe a different company owned the bridge at the time. I believe it was still owned by the railroad company at the time, even though I think the last train that got used was in the 80s. So, let's see, what else do you need to know? Okay, the Freedom Bridge that I'm talking about, that is a restored iron bridge, and it connects the city park to the High Bridge. I believe when we're listening to the story, Mike Patty starts walking towards the bridge, Freedom Bridge, that night, and I believe that's what the police officers took to start searching the trails right away. So they went from the city to the Freedom Bridge into the trails, and Mike Patty was walking towards the Freedom Bridge that evening. So let's see, the trailhead drop-off, we should probably gloss over that real quick. I'm not exactly sure if they were dropped off at the official trailhead or if there was another spot. Most people agree that the drop-off point was County Road 300 North, which is west of the Hoosier Highway, and it's 3/4 of a mile to the bridge. That is something we'd probably have to have, like, Kelsey German very specifically clearly defined, because when I tried to look it up, I just got lots and lots and lots of conflicting sources on that, so I'm not 100%. So the trail system, it was advertised as family safe and a very good place to be. It had a lot of history there, and people wanted more renovations in the area and safety features even before the murders. The trail system was slowly being cleared out and upkept, so it was kind of a work in progress then. After the murders, there was a lot of calls to repair the bridge, install some cameras, and start banning cars, because before the murders, cars just parked at the trailheads even after dark. People describe this area as very beautiful, but it gives you a feeling of isolation. Even though I have heard people going out there to explore the area, and they would say that they could see farmhouses and things like that whilst on the trail. So I guess I'm going to guess that it just has a feeling of isolation even though there's close features, if that makes sense. The uniqueness of this location and the trouble it takes to get to it is what really gave investigators the idea that the suspect must have known this area, that he was either a local or worked in the area, or perhaps he grew up there and then came back to visit. The investigators also kind of played with the idea that the bridge was kind of used as a type of trap, because it was so tall, there was no way off of it once you were on it. It was in disrepair, so you'd have to slow down to cross it. And it's a one-way thing. Obviously, if you're coming across the bridge, it's a pretty big expanse. So it's not like you could just take off the other way, and you couldn't go forward. So it was kind of like a trap, basically. Once you're across the bridge, it obscures visually everything, and it creates a real deep sense of privacy with woodlands on each side. And you can only go forward from the bridge end, and that encroaches on the private property. And I think to there's a trail system, again, on the other side, but I don't know if that's an official trail or not. There's not much really to say about Delphi. There's really nothing historical to cover there for you guys. It has less than 3,000 people. It has a high percentage of children, I noticed, to its populace. The crime index is low, and most of the crimes are property crimes, which makes sense considering the age groups that are there. I believe this was the first homicide since the 1990s, and the first child homicide in Carroll County since at least the 1980s. I do have a small note of significance in that Flora, Indiana, a very nearby town, experienced an arson fire that took the lives of 4 children in 2016, and that is unsolved. So a lot of times when you hear the investigators, they tend to put these two cases together when they're doing presentations. I think it's because it's just the two biggest tragedies in the area, and they happen to be fairly close in time, so they just get talked about together. The closest big cities are Lafayette, which is roughly 30 miles, Indianapolis, which is about 70 miles, Fort Wayne, about 100 miles, and Kokomo, which is about 30 miles. So that day, we know that the girls woke up around 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. on the 13th. And that day they were definitely bored. They had a pancake breakfast, they had tried to paint, and they did some of the work they were doing for their grandma. I think they were just doing some filing work, I believe. Then they really had this idea to convince their family to let them go out to the trails that day. It's possible they had other school friends out there and they had known about that, but I'm not for sure. So the girls, they burst in on Kelsey German while she was trying to get ready, Libby's sister, and they asked her, hey, can you drop us off at the trails? And at first she says no, but then she felt bad and agrees to take them if they can get permission and if they can get a ride back figured out. We know the girls had been to the trails before, and it was a very local, acceptable place to be. I keep harping on that because there is a lot of focus on the girls going out to the trails that day. Like, outside people think it's unusual. Being from a small town as well, I don't think this is unusual at all, especially considering, like, the history of that trail system and how the town just kind of used it for, like, backdrops to photos and things like that. It's a pretty common place to be. So the girls had to be convinced to wear some sweaters outside. They just didn't want to wear outerwear. That tugs at my heartstrings. It really reminds me of my own little ones. Kids, for some reason, they just don't like jackets. And I bet at that age they were like, we're too cool to wear them anymore. It's a worthy note because obviously it's obvious that the girls had no intentions of staying out late. Otherwise they would have taken those jackets without being prompted. I think they had to be prompted twice. Kelsey takes them to the trailhead and she drops them off, exchanging I love yous with her sister. Kelsey says that she can remember details much better now that she's trained herself, but at the time, she really just didn't notice much going on there. She remembers an SUV that had stickers in the back window, and it was probably a dark SUV. And she does remember some people on the trails that day, but they were off into the distance. The time is about 1:45 p.m., and now Kelsey goes to her boyfriend's. The girls obviously go on a small hike, and 2:07 p.m. is their last Snapchat. It shows a picture of Abbey alive and well on the bridge. The photo was taken by Libby. We now know during this time that the girls encounter a man on the bridge. It seems they were uncomfortable by his presence and began to record him with their phone. Of course, at the time, this knowledge wasn't known to any of us. So we don't really know if the killer had followed them and they got startled and started to film them, or if they were on the bridge walking and then he doubled back and started to follow them. We don't really know how this encounter begins. We just know that it happens at the end of the the end of the southeast end of that bridge. And we know Libby is filming him, and it appears she could have been doing it kind of secretively because the camera seems kind of low in her hand. But, like I said, we don't know that either. So, Derek, he is Libby's father. He was the pickup person, and he gives the girls only about a 2-hour window of hiking time. Either about 3 or 3:15 being the two possible pickup times. 3:11 estimated, Derek starts texting or calling Libby to let them know he's on the way, but he's getting no answers. 3:14 he shows up at the trailhead, but the girls aren't there. He does not wait to sound the alarm, and he almost immediately calls Becky Patty. He starts to walk down the trail a little bit. He does encounter a man in a cotton flannel shirt who states, when he's asked if he had seen any girls, that he did see a couple on the bridge. I don't know if he meant like a couple as in a man-woman, or if he meant like a couple of girls. I couldn't find a clear defined statement. 3 different family members call Libby now, and they get no answer on the phone, which is very, very unlike her. She's very quick to answer her phone. 4 o'clock, Becky, she's the girl's grandmother. I'm not sure if I ever said that. She asks her husband, Mike, Patty, he's the grandfather, for help, and he's 30 minutes away because he works in Lafayette. Becky eventually drives out to the trailhead, and on the way over, she checks 2 routes the girls could have walked home along the way. 4:15, more family arrives at the trails. This is probably Becky and Cody, which I believe Cody might be their uncle, but I'm not for sure. Becky says there were enough cars at the trails that she had to park across the road in a ditch. Kelsey is now called around this time as well, and then she arrives at the trails to help look for the girls. She says her and Cody are the ones to cross the bridge that day. They're the only ones to do so. The rest of the family was too scared to do it. And she knew that she was going to check the bridge because she had seen the Snapchat from earlier. So they are calling and yelling for Libby and Abbey at this point. They actually walk the opposite of the crime scene, which makes sense because the 2 of them are following a trail. They're not going onto the private property which is where the girls were. So they follow the trail, and they're going in the direction of Abby's house because they're thinking, maybe they just walked home. There's a trail back there. It goes towards Abby's house. Now, it's about 5 p.m., and Mike arrives, realizing they need to get help. So he calls the sheriffs directly, and he starts walking the trail towards the Freedom Bridge. That's the iron one. And along the way, while he was still on the phone, apparently, he encounters 2 police officers who had immediately started to search for the girls. The family starts using the police station as a miniature hub, and they gather there to file an official report and to continue with their search through the night. The family all searched through the night. Probably Cody, Kelsey, Tara, Amanda, Derek, Mike, and Patty. Those are all family. There could have been more. There could have been less. 5:30 p.m. now. Most of the family has been informed of the girls' disappearance. I believe it's about 5:30 when the police report is officially filed. They were not able to do an Amber Alert, even though everybody wanted them to, because the girls' case did not qualify for an Amber Alert. So the police got a lot of criticism for that, but like I said, they didn't qualify for the Amber Alert, so it's not like they didn't try. Now, the search is intensifying. They have tried everything now. They have pinged phones. They have tried calling AT&T to beg them to trace Libby's phone. They wouldn't do it. They're now posting on social media. They're searching the girls' electronics. They brought all those electronics to the police. They're calling friends. They're using a local phone tree to alert the community for help, which brings out nearly 100 people that night who are all using flashlights to light up everything. So I've even heard it's possible somebody had a night drone out that night. They tried to call in sniffer dogs that night, but they didn't get there fast enough. The fire department, which is ran by volunteers, searched the town methodically because they didn't know where to start looking. So they just checked creeks, they checked ditches, they checked side of roads, they checked families' houses. I believe they were kind of, as they were going to kind of keep things in check, they were just checking an area and then crossing it off on a map, and going to the next area and crossing it off on a map, and so on and so forth. Reportedly, even the mayor, who I think was the youngest mayor at the time, joins the search after hearing about it from 2 towns over, so he drives over to come help. The family is convinced the girls are lost or hurt. Mike Patty, though, begins to think maybe they were abducted, but even so, the official search is called off sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. The reason cited officially was because of the darkness and the cold. The family refuses to give up, and they continue searching and walking the trails. They get out ATVs, they hop on bikes, and this happens to at least 4 a.m. or perhaps longer. Kelsey and Becky are probably one of the only ones that went home that night, and they only went home in hopes that the girls would arrive there or they could answer phone calls for info or anything like that. But other family, I think, keep searching. The next day is February 14th, 2017. It's a Valentine's Day, Tuesday. The sunrise is about 7:41 a.m. And the search continues officially in the morning, and the start time is about 7 to 9 a.m. The historical weather report for the day is that it is cloudy from 1:45 a.m. until around 8 a.m. or so. The dew point was around 29.8, and the high was 58 degrees with a low of 33 degrees. There was some light wind as well. I always try and include the weather for you guys because I believe it could help set the scene for those that aren't there and provide clues and maybe jog memories for people who are there or were there. So I believe the intended start time was 7 a.m., but from hearsay, there was a dense fog that morning, and the official start had to be pushed off until around 9 a.m. or so. A headquarters for the search is at the fire department. Becky and Mike's pastor, Todd Ladd, LADD, of Delphi Methodist, is asked to go there and help organize the people and check them in. Canine units, dive teams, and volunteers from all over the place, even outside of the hit city, come. Helicopters and the police take up the search. Volunteers were split into groups, and they're set into different locations. It was supposed to be around 10 to 12 people in a group, and they were to cover about 20 to 25 square miles per group. The amount of volunteers on the logs were over 300 strong, but many didn't even bother to check in, so some are even unverified. There were so many people to coordinate that the law enforcement had to make a mobile command center at the start of the trails in order to coordinate all the people with cell phones. The search was said to have been very somber. There was little talking and very little happening. Most groups were sent away from the official searching trails and away from the sniffer dogs. It was pretty muddy, so they had to stick to walking along roads. They'd search private properties if they were given permission, and then they would check barns and ditches or just kind of look in them along the way. Kelsey German is assigned to a group to cross the high bridge. Some of the people in this group include some of her own family, Derek, and a grandfather. I think this was the grandfather, Brad, and a sister of Kelsey, and a female from the school, which kind of knew Kelsey, I think, and another male searcher. The group is afraid to cross that bridge for the most part, so they kind of break off, and a few of them cross the bridge and a few of them search the trail that's very close by to that bridge. Kelsey and only 4 to 5 people cross the bridge. They look under the bridge and around in this area. This is the group that finds the girls around noon. It starts with a single shoe. Kelsey is standing on a hill near the trail, but not on the trail, while the male searcher is down closer to the creek, down the hill and up from the bridge, but on the ground. So they're on the ground, but like underneath it. This, again, would make more sense if you can look at a map. Kelsey is able to identify the shoe by verbal communication with this male searcher. It's either Abbey's or Libby's. Now the searcher thinks he can see movement across this creek, so he actually opens up his cell phone and he zooms in with the cell phone for a better look across the creek. Through the camera, he sees 2 does, and they're together and standing in a very particular spot. He thinks it's interesting, so he walks in that direction to inspect further. Along the way, it's possible he found footprints, but this is not confirmed information. Where the does are standing, lay the bodies of the girls in the deep grass between a grouping of trees. Kelsey hears this and she tries to rush forward to them, but is stopped by the female school worker that knew Kelsey, and then Kelsey decides, okay, I need to take care of my grandfather first because he has a heart condition. So she gets on an ATV with him and then goes to his house. So she actually goes down that path that goes towards Abby's house at this point, and takes her grandfather to his house. This is where she calls her father Derek too, and asks for him to go there. Now, the news of the girls being found is spreading very quickly through the community. It is all unofficial at this point. The family goes to the city hall where they're met with a mass of reporters outside. They end up having to park out back, and then they had to sneak them out after that to avoid the media frenzy. They become officially informed there, the family does. Not the media, though. So, even though the word was unofficial, when they got home, their homes were filled with food to prep the family for the time ahead. And the community even does this for the law enforcement too. The law enforcement surprises everyone because they refuse to confirm the girl's identity publicly. They did say they were investigating a crime scene, but they had not stopped the search for the girls just yet. They were just scaling back. It's at this point the FBI does become involved in this case. Ominously, when asked if the people should be afraid, the answer at the conference was, quote, I think people in the community are smart enough in our community to draw their own conclusions about what they should feel and shouldn't, the Delphi Police Chief Steve Mullen said. Our people are very smart. We have a very good community and they're very strong, and they are able to draw their own conclusions about this whole situation very successfully. Unquote. That very same night at Delphi United Methodist, a community vigil is held, and it is attended by over 700 people. They support each other, they support the law enforcement, and they support the family. They read from the book of Matthews, and this is actually a community church event. So not only did United Methodist participate and host, other churches came and helped too. So now, we're rolling into the next day. It's February 15th, 2017. Today is a Wednesday. Law enforcement has their very first press conference, and they finally announce a homicide. The identity of the girls, and they release a still photo of a man on the high bridge. They do not give any other info other than they just want to talk to the people that were there that day, and they want to talk to the man on the bridge. They just say talk. They don't call him a suspect. They also ask to look at any photos that people took, and that's about it. They don't even state where the photo came from, which caused a lot of rumors, by the way. Sergeant Kim Riley has a quote many assumed had a deeper meaning and caused some stirring within the communities. He said, quote, "I think people need to be cautious and careful," Riley said. "Parents should make sure they know where their children are and what their children are doing, and if nothing else, know what's going on in their lives. That's the most important thing I can say at this time," unquote. Sergeant Kim Riley advises parents to keep an eye on their children, whilst the Carroll County Sheriff's Department said there's no immediate danger. So you can imagine that caused a lot of drama. A lot of people looked into that pretty deeply, and they just assumed that the girls were going out there to meet someone and they met a bad end, but there's no evidence to that. Even to this day, this rumor persists, and it really just irritates me because law enforcement has kind of softly pushed back against that rumor, and the family has just straight up said, no, that's not what they were doing. We know, according to sources like Twitter feeds from the news, that there were dive teams out that day, launching boats near the scene, and the FBI was actually looking at the crime scene. A tip line is set up, a command center, and Homeland Security is brought in to help with the communications. The girls' social media is scrutinized by the law enforcement, and an FBI recovery team works on a profile of the killer. Quote, "Everyone is a suspect," unquote. That was said by Sergeant Riley. The law enforcement remains very tight-lipped, and no new info is released. The crime scene tape stayed up at least 2 weeks. We also know they spent time searching properties near the crime scene, going through barns, outbuildings, and interviewing people. It's possible, but unconfirmed, that a few items of interest had been recovered at the crime scene. Perhaps a shoe, a girl's undergarment, a cigarette butt in the water, and possible footprints and DNA were obtained, possibly fingerprints too, but there is no official information on this whatsoever. DNA was sent to a lab, and that was reported in the news, but no info other than that was released. It was on a fast track, quote, to get the results too. No official ruling about how the girls died either, except that the police had confirmed a homicide. Law enforcement is vague, also, about their witnesses and witness information. On this day as well, autopsies and toxicology is done, and they both took longer than usual, with no results being revealed, except for the official announcement about the girls' identities. So again, this spurns rumors about if the girls were so disfigured or something, why it would take so long. There's no evidence for this. Nothing's ever been said publicly. And I do believe, this is unconfirmed too, but I think the girls had an open casket viewing. So, and there was rumors about them, like wearing scarves and not scarves. None of that is valid, so I'm not going to really talk about those kind of rumors very much, other than to touch base that, yes, they're there, and yes, they kind of suck, because they don't really help the case. Anyway, before I go off on a tangent about that, let's get back to the details here. Now, it is February 19th through the 22nd in 2017. Law enforcement has another conference, and this time they release a very short audio clip. You can hear the words, "down the hill." I believe this conference they also finally confirmed that the photo/audio comes from Libby's phone, and they officially named the bridge guy as a suspect now, and also ask for some very specific info from the public, which they recant later, and they don't ask for this later. So I'm going to give you a quote. Quote, "We're trying to get people that were driving down the Hoosier Heartland, that was on the interstate, that was in Logansport, that might have seen somebody walking, hitchhiking. If they saw a duffel bag laying there, anything, we're reaching out for people that saw anything within that distance," Riley said. Unquote. Okay. So, DNA was collected from the crime scene. That's been alluded to a lot, but we have no official knowledge on what they've got and if it actually pertains to the crime. Now, it's August 14th now, 2017 still. Information that there could have been a longer recording is mentioned in the news, Though Lesenby has denied allegations that the murder was caught on the tape the girls record, he does acknowledge that the girls have recorded themselves talking, and they mention a man. Context about this has not been released. We also know there's other small confirmations that there might be a longer audio, but I don't think it pertains to the case very much. 5 months later, in July, the Indiana State Police released their first composite sketch of Bridge Guy and include a description of him. He's a white man between 5'6" and 5'10", weighing about 180 to 220 pounds with reddish brown hair and unknown eye color. In December of that year, the girl's family and lead investigator appear on Dr. Phil. The episode is called The Indiana Train Track Murders, in case you feel like looking that up. Now we're rolling into February 13th, but of 2018. It is now the 1-year anniversary. They have another press conference, but no new news is released. The general feeling from this press conference that I got is they are thanking and pleading with the media to keep this story fresh and front and center. That year, in May, I believe, the family goes to CrimeCon, and this is where Kelsey German finds her passion to advocate for her sister and for people who are like her. She finds a good friend there, and this is the spurn of her Twitter, of her going on YouTube, on all these kind of good things. April 19th through the 22nd in 2019. Now, this is what I call the, quote, New Direction Conference. That's my nickname for it. I call it that because the atmosphere of this conference is explosive and unusual. I highly recommend that you watch all the conferences, but if you watch only one, this is the one. It's a benchmark one because of the very passionate speech by Sergeant Carter, who speaks directly to the killer. They also release a longer audio clip and a slightly longer video clip of Bridge Guy. And here's the doozy, they release a new sketch. It's supposed to be of Bridge Guy, an updated one. This is much to everybody's shock. It just features a younger man. The sketch causes mass confusion even among the law enforcement themselves. They don't know if there are 2 suspects now or if this is an update. The face is so different, the family is just shocked. Apparently the sketch had been done by a witness on the trails that day, and it was only just now being released with very little information on why. Law enforcement now asks the public for specific information on the driver of a vehicle that was parked at the old abandoned CPS/DSC or DCS welfare building. It has since been burnt down. It's in Delphi on the east side of Country Road 300 next to the Hoosier Hartway Highway between noon and 5 p.m. the day the girls vanished. They did not give specifics about what type of vehicle, and many people started making assumptions about the type of vehicle because I think he uses the word like car or truck or something like that. There was weird rumors about vans. There was weird rumors about being able to see it from a helicopter. There was weird rumors about the building. People got confused because they said abandoned building and then they assumed the car was abandoned. It was quite a mess. Lots and lots of rumors. Lastly, the conference was unusual in that they had to have known it was going to be a bombshell because they recorded, I believe, this is allegedly they recorded the names of the individuals that attended this conference, and they may have even photographed or at least filmed the attendees. The layout of the press conference you can find online via Twitter or my write-up. In case you're really curious, because I know people want to see, like, behind the scenes to see if maybe they could pick the killer out of the crowd, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, Sergeant Carter also, interestingly, references a movie called The Shack. I thought that was weird, so I thought I'd throw this in. Anyway, from here on out, there are very little updates to the case. While the press conference garnered new tips, no more info from law enforcement is released. Sheriff Lesenby, in lone upcoming interviews, alludes to fingerprints and DNA. He says the girls had been killed in the area they were found. He also says the murderer was not caught on film, or the murder was not caught on film, and he acknowledges the calling off of the search the first night could have been a mistake. And he personally thinks that going back on the early clues could be very helpful. Lesenby also states he thinks the perpetrator is a well-known local community member, and he also supports that the sketches were supplied by 2 different witnesses that day around this time. So, I think that's pretty interesting. Later that year, the family goes on Dr. Oz. I don't have the episode name for you guys there, so I'm sorry. I believe it was in August. So... And now, a very small, interesting highlight in this year also is in the form of Robert Ives. He is a former prosecutor who worked on the case, and he talks in the HLN podcast, the Down the Hill podcast. Highly recommend this podcast series if you haven't heard it. And he says the scene may have been staged. It was like nothing that he's ever seen before. And it was bizarre, and it was very shocking. Retired FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole, that was a mouthful to say, I'm sorry, weighed in on this case as well in the same podcast and said the signatures is a I guess there was 3 different signatures at the crime scene. My autistic butt thought she meant literal signatures, like somebody wrote something there. No. What she means by signatures is it's a satisfying behavior by the offender, and staging is often done by somebody who knows the victims. So, that's interesting. And I think Ives had said there was at least 3 signatures at this crime scene that were unnecessary to the crime. And I think he also said that the girls had been placed side by side. So we know that it has been staged, and we know there was 3 signatures there. Unless they're counting the staging as a signature. Ives also said that at first dozens of search warrants and subpoenas were issued, seeking cell phone locations and phone identities, but the law does not allow bulk collection of data like that without cause of a particular phone being an involvement. So that, I guess that just didn't peter out. And that was the highlight of that year. So at this point, nationally, there are 6,000 electronic billboards in 46 states pleading for information on this case. A total of 48,000 tips have been turned in. Over 1,000 plus people have been interviewed. I believe tips were being inputted into an FBI system because they were getting so many, called the Pyramid, and it sorts the information from importance to least and cross-references other tips as well, so it can help compare things. We do not know if law enforcement have tried Parabon, phenotyping, genetics. It seems very unlikely that they would tell us if they had, due to keeping the case so secret. I do believe it seems like the cost is of no concern for this case. So I'm going to guess, and I think we can say an educated guess, that they have tried all these things. I would think so. I believe in the May conference, one of the law enforcement officers talked about contacting the mayor every so often and keeping him informed. Or maybe it's the governor, I can't remember. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. So, usually at this point, we would be discussing the suspects in detail, but unfortunately, there's very little to discuss. We don't have suspects to discuss, really. Our number 1 suspect is Bridge Guy. He has 2 sketches, with the newer one being the most accurate. There is a voice recording of him and a small video. He's a white man, between 5'6" and 5'10", weighing around 180 pounds to 220 pounds, with reddish-brown hair and an unknown eye color. Bridgeman, in my opinion, is an, quote, everyman. His appearance is just general Midwest to me, and there's very nothing interesting to him minus some of his layering. And really, it only stands out because that day had slightly warmer weather. So really, this could mean he either got up early, or he planned to stay out late, or he just ran cold. Some people say his clothes look bulky or oddly shaped. Perhaps the man is plus size, wearing overly baggy clothes, or perhaps he has stuff stuffed inside his clothes. He could be manufacturing an older man look. Bridge guy might have had facial hair in the video, but, I mean, that's 4-ish years ago, so, hair can change. His hat is also described as everything between floppy hair to bandanas, scarves, hoodies, baseball caps turned backwards, hunter hats, camo hats, hats with flaps, and newsboys caps. It almost sounds like a song. Anyways, whatever it is, the color is brownish, possibly a tan or a shade of gray hat or hair. Coat is very similar. It is described everything from Carhartt with a hoodie underneath, Gulf coat with layers, dark or a bluish color, possibly gray, maybe layers underneath. Pants, everybody describes them as probably denim. Some people say they can see stains or holes or outlines of things. There is a possible bag around his waist. It's like a brownish object, often described as a fanny pack or a bit of untucked shirt or a hoodie or a pocket. The shoes. The shoes are darker in color. Many assumed it's boots. I kind of wonder if it's not like a high-top sneaker, and it could possibly have a stripe. Voice. The public say, gut feeling, his voice sounds like somebody who used to be an authority over children. It has a low and soft, quiet quality, possibly with a basic accent from the area. This is also something. People either hear a young man or an old man, depending on who they are. His gait has also been described everything between athletic to disabled. So, that's all there is to say about Bridge Guy. Also, the mysterious vehicle that the law enforcement wanted to have information about that was parked at the CPS building. Not much information on that, but people want the info, so I'm putting that out there again. So let's see, other suspects. There was Ron Logan. He was the private property owner who was investigated twice extensively and then cleared. There were small connections, but nothing major. And I guess he had like a weird story, but then they ironed it out. Apparently he was like a habitual traffic offender, which I think is a nice way to say that he was a drunk driver. And I believe he went and like bought fish that day, or he went to the dump and he was a little drunk, so I think he might have lied about what he was doing, and that got him in a little bit of trouble, but he was definitely cleared of any involvement of the murders. So besides that, there's never been anything solid. If a name was dropped in the news, it was kind of like soft ruled out, or maybe just not at all by law enforcement. Like there's Paul Etter, Thomas Bruce, Charles Eldridge. There was a home on the 1100 blocks of Bicycle Road. There's the Mears Barn, the John Miller guy. And all of those were mentioned in the news as interests or suspects, but then never officially declared by any law enforcement. So, or they just stopped talking about them, so you can kind of assume they ruled them out, you know. Then there's the big gun, the big boy here. Everybody was talking about Daniel J. Nations. Nations, he reached a fever level of investigations by online people interested in the case. There was people on there doing things that I do, that they just compiled massive information on this one guy because they were convinced that it was him. However, law enforcement said they were no longer looking into him, and they were like, yeah, we know. It seems very similar to this case, but we're not looking into him anymore. And then Nations himself later said he gave DNA so that he could clear his name of that case, because he didn't want involvement in that, obviously. Right, so let's go ahead and tackle motivations of the murder. Motivations, we are going to have to guess here, because we've got nothing, guys. Absolutely nothing. But motivations of murder can really just vary, but some of the basics and the most common, and I'm basing this off of serial killers, the basics and the most common are visionaries, missions, hedonists, power/control. Visionaries are often killers with breaks from reality, mental illness, and psychotic episodes. Mission killers think they're doing some sort of good. Hedonistics, they get pleasure of some type from their kills. Doesn't always have to be sexual, but sexual can go in that category. Power/control, and which is pretty self-explanatory, and then there could be mixed versions of this too. I think the FBI has their own classification of serial killers. I could be wrong, but I think they go with only 3 categories. They go with organized, disorganized, and mixed. I went with serial killer motivations because I feel like it covers all the motivations, basically. I feel like anybody's motivation for murder can fall into those categories, so I went ahead and popped those all in there, because I think it makes sense. Also, just a personal opinion, but just the way they're handling this case kind of makes me feel like perhaps this could be a serial killer. I can't, for the life of me, think of why they would be so tight-lipped. And that one conference, that electric conference, the New Direction one in April, man, that really just, I was already thinking it, but then when I watched that conference, I was like, oh, wow, okay. This is scary. They've really, they're on to something scary. Anyway, that's just my opinion. You can take it or leave it. It's just there. There are so many rumors to this case and so many other theories on this case. You know, instead of my usual deep dive where I will go through those things with you guys, I'm going to just do a super broad gloss over. And I plan on glossing over a lot of the more lurid or sensational crap that people were coming up with. So if you want more of that stuff, you can just check out my write-up, or just go look into this case yourself and you'll run into it. Anyways, a lot of people, including some law enforcement, are convinced the killer is a sex offender, SO, and many started looking through the public records, even online, even with the public. They just started doing it, looking at the SOs in the area. At the time, roughly, and this isn't confirmed info, I can't go back and look, there was about 40 to 50 living in the area, with 1 non-compliant, and about 10 of them working from the local meat packing plant. The meat packing plant was a very focused thing people were thinking about as a possible source of where the killer could have worked, but also have gone unnoticed and been wearing the kind of clothes he was wearing. Then there's my usual grab bag. I always call these the twin theories. I want to say it's BBC Sherlock, but he's always, there was like a thing where he was like, well, maybe it could have been twins. And I think Sherlock is like, it's never twins. And this is my it's never twins category. Not that it's never twins, it's just very unusual, you know. Anyways, here's what I mean. It seems like with almost every case that I've done a write-up on, there's always this collection of theories that are very similar. And one of the ones is the cry of police corruption. And people, like in this case, turned in tips on their own law enforcement. And they were citing things like, well, the body of the killer matches one of our police people, or his voice sounds similar. And so they turned in tips. The public also thought that law enforcement knows who the killer is, but they just need more evidence. Or, as in, like, the twins theory, everybody is always like, it has to be one of their own that they're covering up for. Then there's the kids theory. There's all sorts of versions of this one where they think either other kids did it, or it happened by accident, or there were suicide pacts, or they were going out to meet somebody. There's the families were a part of gangs, and these were revenge killings. There's the vagabond theories, which I might subscribe to on this one, unfortunately for me. Like drifters, truck drivers, farmhands, and the similar. I kind of thought maybe, we don't know. Yeah, so like the very typical, things. Oh, and Satanism was one that always comes up with every one of my cases that I've been working on. My goodness, if I have to see that one again, I'm gonna throw my computer. Okay, so another thing people were doing, a lot of people tried to put the blame on the parents for the girls being out alone, and a lot of people then tried to put the blame on the girls by saying they were trying to meet up with someone or party. And I've repeated this twice because they were very focused on it. Like, to this day, this rumor persists. But neither of these things hold water, and there's no evidence for it. So to tackle the first part, the girls were teenagers. They were traveling in a group. They were in a place that they were familiar. The area's advertised as family safe. They were in a small town. The girls were trustworthy. I think that people are just outraged by it because they're afraid that this could just happen to anybody, including them. So, yeah, okay, my rant over. Oh, lastly, there was a lot of psychics and paranormal investigators that jumped in onto this case. I don't know how I feel about them, but I just thought I would mention them for data's sake. What else did people do? Oh, they kind of super focused on the cell phones and the cell phone towers. They even accused, law enforcement of altering photos and video. And then the cell phone towers thing, Kelsey German and others, she was having to go on YouTube to disprove the cell phone tower things. Because it was just a very small misquote that had people going wild with this idea that the cell phone was being moved all over town and the girls were moving around and all this other stuff. But that's not true. Basically, Mike Patty just didn't really know how the cell phone towers worked. He made a misquote, people ran with it, and that's just not what happened. Basically, the cell towers worked how they should have, and that was that. So, the girls weren't moving around or anything weird. Some of the girls' family thought that the case was botched, thinking the crime scene was contaminated by the sheer volume of volunteer workers. Personally, I'm not going to really talk about or get into that, thought too much, but I'm going to say there's no wrong way to feel. And I think it's okay to bring up concerns, even if they're negative concerns, when it comes to something this dang important, Let them say their piece. Let them get the evidence they need. Let them get the closure they need. Let them dissect the situation to make sure all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. Because what if that family member is correct and it happened? What if it needs to change for the future? You know what I mean? You can't fix the past, but what if it needs to change for the future? What if it did happen and all that family member needs is for somebody to say, yes, okay, it happened, we're changing it, we're sorry. And what if they are not, what if it's wrong? Okay, they get the evidence they need. They can see that it's there and they can get their closure. Either way, I don't think there's any wrong way to feel here. So, the rumors flying around the girls' bodies, the cause of deaths, time of deaths are so intense. This is the kind of stuff that I'm not going to cover here today. Because it just makes me so mad. And I really don't want to get that worked up about this. No. I've already done my time with it. I've moved on. I think I've spent days furious about some of these things that I read. But most of this stuff is made up, and in the worst ways, and there's no, I'm going to tell you, don't even bother trying to look it up. Law enforcement has done no official information, and that's that. So, the crime scene also has a lot of rumors, but they can mostly be dispelled, and if you're willing to trust Sharon Lesenby, who says the girls were killed at the crime scene, there's no reason to subscribe to any other theories. I know police, I think they can lie if they need to on cases, so take that with a grain of salt. I'm not going to tell you how to feel or how to think on that. I actually, you know what? I don't want to tell you how to feel or think about anything. If I'm ranting about something in particular, that's just my own opinion, okay? Anyways, there has been besides all this negative stuff, one of my favorite things about this case is that there has been a large public support of good by the community, by people like us, for the families and the girls. I really wish we could focus on these kind of things a little bit more. But it is what it be. Actually, I wish I could tell you all the good things, but there's just so many. I can only do highlights. So, like, they do a food drive annually now, along with many sports and fundraisers. There was scholarships set up for the girls, in honor of the girls for their peers. The Delphi community puts up orange light bulbs on their porches, in the girls' memory and in hopes they catch the killer. They plaster everything with the Delphi flyers. Lastly, and most amazingly, they are working on this massive park called the Abbey and Libby Memorial Park. It's received grants and attention, but the project really could still use more help and more spread the information about it. So currently there's about 20 acres. It's just northeast of Delphi. It's 25 miles from the Purdue campus. Basically, this project has been what the friends and the family and the residents have poured their love into while they wait for closure on this case. One of my favorite things was from Diane Erskine, Abby's grandmother, I believe. She was out there clearing the earth, getting ready for this project. And she said she kept unearthing these heart-shaped stones all over the place in the land. And I agree with her. It's like she was thinking that the girls were giving their blessings for this project. I agree. That's so lovely. Then there's things like Purdue donating their lights. There's the public donations that help the project keep getting bigger and bigger. It's been growing as the years grow longer, with the hopes to put into the park 3 ball diamonds, trails, amphitheaters, playgrounds, buildings, picnic shelters, parking lots, and even more. So I think that's so cool. So there's actually an official website for that. I would go check it out. And I think that concludes our case for the most part, guys. I want to keep jabbering. I have more info, but I really should probably just wrap the case up. More info as in tedious stuff, nothing that actually helps this case. So I guess that segues. How can we help this case? I'm harping on this hard, but I think the best way to help this case is to share their story. Share the flyers. There is an official website, an official government website with flyers you can easily share. Abbey and Libby have their own website with flyers on it that you can officially share. You can, if you want to, share my story here. You don't have to, but if you want to. And you could also donate to the Reward Fund or the Memorial Park. Locals, you could try to remember details from those days. And if you can, turn in a really good tip. So a tip should be including the suspect name, their birthday, their age, physical description, specific reason that you're turning in the tip, specific addresses, last seen locations, vehicles they were driving, motivations, and a connection to Delphi. Also, if you know somebody that looks like the sketch in voice and video and has a connection to Delphi, turn them in via tip. But you have to be very specific. It's got to match the match the guy, and it has to have a connection to Delphi, that person. So don't just turn in random people, you know? And I'm going to end this case with a quote from Anna Williams. Quote, "If he is found, I'll sleep a bit better, knowing he can't hurt anyone else. But it doesn't bring my kid back. He can rot in jail, or they can give him the death penalty and put a needle in his arm. It will just be a piece of the puzzle put into place. But Abbey will still be the piece that's missing." From Anna Williams. So guys, I love you. Thank you for sticking through and waiting for my next episode. I know that it was a long time between the first one and now, so I appreciate everybody that has tuned in. I am pleased and also horrified that my podcast, the very first episode, has 25 downloads on it. I'm a little flabbergasted, and it makes me kind of want to hide under a rock, but then it also kind of makes me want to keep going too. I am now on Spotify and other streaming places, which I'm having a hard time believing that I'm there, but here I am, so hi. And I guess you can see, if you are watching me on YouTube, that you are not seeing my face. I found out that it was much easier for me to record and talk naturally without having the anxiety of recording my face while I was doing it. So that's the reason. I hope that doesn't tank my views on YouTube, but it is what it be, and I'm going to try to roll with it and see if it's a good fit. So, thank you, and I hope to see you again on my next episode. I don't know what we'll be covering. I tend to just look at cases and wait for a zing, if that makes sense. Something that really speaks to my soul that I feel like I need to talk about. So, I'll hope to see you then. This is Mary, out.